My friends, on the 7th of February, Russia's Ministry of Defense announced the full capture of the city of Toretsk. That's when our beloved Ukrainskaya Armia played the reverse card on the Russians.
Dude, they reversed it! That's a first!
Is Ukraine actually taking back Toretsk?
Yes!
That's right, Ukraine launched a completely unexpected counterattack in this sector. This is how pro-Russian Telegram channel Rybar described the situation in Toretsk. More and more alarming reports continue to come from this direction. At this moment, all across Toretsk, Ukrainian detachments have been geolocated deep inside enemy lines. You see, for months, Russian assault detachments were creeping their way forward block by block. And then, at first light, on the 5th month, at dawn, the 12th Brigade Azov surged from the west, while the Lyud Police Brigade erupted in the north. Russian lines cracked and the situation deteriorated quickly for them. As of now, Ukrainian forces are said to have reclaimed 20% of Toretsk. Now the fog of war remains across the battered city. Even Deep State UA has yet to update the map. As you can see, the situation is more confusing than selecting the real picture of JD Vance. At this point, I don't even remember what he actually looks like. From a military perspective, Toretsk is a vital stronghold for Ukraine in Donbass. If the Russians capture it, it will open the gate towards Kostiantynivka and beyond to Kramatorsk, the new capital of Donetsk Oblast. From a political perspective, with the collapsing situation in Kursk, some people believe this counterattack was launched by Ukraine to prove to its Western partners that the Ukrainian armed forces can still bite. Now the question is, are they gonna bite into concrete? Welcome to HistoryLegends, and here are the latest news of the Russo-Ukrainian war. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. As you know, some of my videos have been targeted with limited or no ads. So make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal to keep the show running. Thank you to everyone that has already helped, and welcome to the headquarters. So what I suggest is that before we talk about Ukraine's counterattack in Toretsk, let's go through a little summary of what happened in that sector since my last video. As always, if you're in a rush, you can just check out the chapters below. September 2024. This was the frontline situation in Toretsk on the 1st of September when we last left off. Right at the moment when Russian assault detachments had gained their first foothold inside the urban area of Toretsk proper. Meanwhile, 7 kilometers to the south, most of the village of New York had been taken by the Russians, but remained a gray zone, so some contested territory around this factory. By the 5th of September, the Russian army made some gains in New York and Druzhba, but at the same time the Ukrainians counterattacked in Nilipivka. It's only on the 14th of September that the Russians actually stormed the factory. 1 week later, by the 20th, the Russian command restarted offensive operations inside Toretsk. They infiltrated Ukrainian lines and advanced street by street, block by block. Progression was difficult. Drone operators of the Ukrainian 100th Mechanized Brigade made the Russians pay a 15% tax for every meter. To avoid being spotted, Russian units advanced into the city in groups of 3 to 4 men, which quickly scattered through the ruins. By doing so, the Russians could actually bypass Ukrainian strongholds and take up positions in buildings that were abandoned or not defended by the enemy. What you have to understand is that the battlefield is mostly empty. Not every house or building is manned. Then, Russian company commanders would dispatch one fire team after another to accumulate as many riflemen as possible in certain sectors. For sure, some units would be intercepted by Ukrainian drones, but not all of them. These Russian urban breachheads would cut off the supplies of enemy positions. Eventually, they swelled until they could overwhelm Ukrainian bastions or simply by forcing them to withdraw. That's how by the 22nd of September, the Russians advanced 900 meters along Dzerzhinsky Street and captured the prison colony of Toretsk. Because of this push, the Ukrainians abandoned all their positions between New York and Pivdene. Oh, I almost forgot, the day before the Russians went for a quickie. But yeah, they didn't bring any protection. Long story short, they attempted the blitz with a column of 7 lightly armored vehicles straight into Leonidivka. That was a bold move because it was 4 kilometers beyond the contact line. Well, what had to happen happened. They didn't have any protection, and they got denied. They were stopped when the 2 lead vehicles were immobilized by Ukrainian fire, while the rest of the column quickly returned to base. At the same time, this also meant that potentially this entire area was now in the gray zone. Not controlled by the Ukrainians, but not secured by the Russians either. On the 27th of September, Russian assault detachments got a foothold inside Nelipivka, and this also marked the complete fall of New York. Meanwhile, further to the north, heavy fighting took place at this important road junction inside Toretsk, right next to the central Dzerzhinsk mine. That's pretty much it for the month of September, not very glorious as the Russian army in Toretsk only advanced by 1,000 meters. October 2024. On the 3rd of October, Russian Sturm detachments advanced 350 meters and mopped up about 20 multi-level buildings. They certainly did a better job than Mexican janitors. From there, they could leapfrog from one building to another and cut the city in two. To carry on the offensive, the Russian command had to bring a lot of reinforcements from the outskirts into the urban area. Of course, to avoid being detected, they wouldn't go through this journey in one shot, but they would go from one pit stop to another. And this is what you can see in this video, where Ukrainian drones targeted a team of Russian riflemen as they took a quick break at one of these forward operating bases. In this one, GG well played, it's an unlucky Russian soldier that was spotted as he was sleeping in some woods.
Fuck.
By the 11th of October, the Russians had cleared most of the central area of Toretsk. Meanwhile, to the west, they stormed this 1,200 meter long tree line, which could then be used as a stepping stone to bypass the village of Nelipivka from the west. We could see how the Russians were preparing a large flanking operation, because as they attacked from the west, other Russian assault squads were spotted on the eastern side of the village. There it's the 241st Territorial Defense Brigade that targeted Russian troops that occupied enemy positions. On the 15th of October 2024, the Sparta Battalion of the DPR celebrated its 10th anniversary. Can you imagine 10 years of war between Ukraine and Russia? Now, the thing is, as part of their tradition, they don't light up candles on a cake. They prefer fireworks. Here they lit up a T-64 that was then immobilized after multiple drone strikes, followed by burned down M113 APC and another one shortly after. In the following 2 weeks, so by the 31st of October, Russian army units only made marginal gains. Good thing I don't do daily videos. In that case, I don't know what I would have told you guys. With that being said, the Russians were concentrating their forces in and around Nelipivka, because once this village fall, they could continue and then flank Toretsk from the west, and thus avoid a street-by-street urban battle. However, it was this district south of Toretsk called Zabalka that blocked the Russian advance. An area 1.5 km wide by 2 km long. So once again, if we take a look at Russian gains at the beginning of October up until the end of the month, it's not very impressive either. November 2024. On the 2nd of November, the Russians declared the full capture of the village of Druzhba, located on the northeastern outskirts of Toretsk. This Russian Sturm detachment was waiting for its delivery of vodka bottles, when a rapid Ukrainian counterattack ruined the party and cancelled most of those gains. Starting in November, Russian units also increased their use of fiber optics drones. In this footage, we can see one such drone destroying a Ukrainian Cossack vehicle. In today's war for the Ukrainians, those MRAPs are essential, since they allow for quick resupplies, medevac, and rapid rotations of military personnel. By the 6th of November, Russian assault squads cleared 7 commie blocks at the center of Toretsk. 1 week later, by the 13th, they had reached the central Dzerzhinsky mine. During the same period, Russian forces gained 400 meters inside Nelipivka and greatly expanded the gray zone. Meanwhile, the Zabalka district held strong, when all of a sudden, Igor and Bogdan, who had a bit too much to drink, stumbled from one ruin to another and found themselves 1,000 meters beyond the contact line. Unbeknown to them, they had broken through Ukrainian lines. A couple days later, Russian sabotage groups had made significant progress in this direction. By the 18th of November, Russian forces advanced 1,000 meters looking for Igor and Bogdan as they cleared this entire forested area. As a reminder, these forested areas are very important on a tactical level, especially this forested area, which has an area of 1 square kilometer. This is equivalent to 140 football fields. So imagine the number of troops and the quantity of equipment that can be stored and camouflaged there. At the end of the month, Russian army units gained another kilometer in the Zabalka district, but this time they sent a clear message to NATO satellites.
Yo!
As you can see with this before, after there was a lot more movement in November, and the turning point was when the Russians captured this entire forested area. December 2024. On the 2nd of December, Lost Armor published this footage of a fiber optics drone passing by 6 destroyed Ukrainian vehicles near these Terikons. On the 3D map, this is the Zabalka district south of Toretsk, and this is the location where the drone recorded the steel graveyard. So we can believe the Ukrainian command had to find a new way to resupply their forces in the southern district. They probably used these dirt roads linking Zabalka to the village of Cherbenivka. As a matter of fact, another armored personnel carrier, a YPR-765, was also immobilized along this new supply line. Overall, due to these logistics problems, by the 7th of December, the Ukrainian command was forced to abandon entire parts of the district to the enemy. What was interesting is that as the Ukrainians were pulling out from the south, they started reinforcing their positions north of Toretsk. In this video, you can see the intervention of 2 MRAPs attached to the 3rd Special Purpose Regiment, Omega. The operators threw bags into the openings. Risky, never blindly stick it in a hole. But regardless, they released everything and detonated the entire building once they got the F out of there. That's when Russia faced a growing number of hit-and-run fire missions inside Toretsk. As resistance increased inside the city, more attention was brought to the western flank. On the 11th of December, as Russian riflemen jumped from one house to another in Nilipivka, nothing major happened for the next days. The Russians simply kept reinforcing the units sitting on the contact line. Fast forward to the 23rd of December. Whoops, we went off script, barely any territorial changes. At the same time, this gives you an idea how long it takes to rotate out entire battalions from the front line. The Russian command was impatient, so they attempted to break the deadlock in Nilipivka with another blitz. But then a gang of FPVs banged them real good. So yeah, that didn't work. Eventually the pressure got to a point where the Ukrainians were forced to withdraw 700 meters in Nilipivka and another 450 meters in the southern Zabalka district. That's how the Russians reached the area of the steel graveyard near the waste heaps. Here on the 31st of December, some of the reinforcements arrived in BMPs, but those were immediately targeted by Ukrainian drones. So since these big armored vehicles are easy to spot, a lot of the redeployments for the Russian troops are done by foot. And this is also one of the main reasons why we don't see as many Russian armored vehicles anymore. There are just too many drones. January 2025. So let's do a quick wrap up of the frontline situation between the 1st of September and the 31st of December. Despite the slow pace of advance of Russian infantry units, in 4 months they captured 40% of the urban area of Toretsk. So is the Russian offensive in this area successful or not? I'll let you judge. After a couple days of rest, on the 7th of January, Russian army units captured a good part of the Dzerzhinsk mine and pushed parallel to the Historichna street to bypass this Ukrainian stronghold. On one hand, Russian rifle squads were galvanized by the fact that they penetrated deeper and deeper. On the other, they left behind this entire industrial complex in enemy hands. By the 10th of January, the Ukrainians were getting squeezed out of the city. Slowly but surely, Russian soldiers got closer to the enemy goalpost.
The battle is almost done!
In this video, you can see Russian troops raising their battle flag on waste heap number 10 on the northern edge of the city. More specifically, this is the banner of the 4th Company, 3rd Battalion, 109th Rifle Regiment, which said, "Нет гения без примеси безумия," or in English, "There's no genius without a touch of madness." Meanwhile, further south, the Russian commander of the New York sector really got inspired by this quote and decided to launch another blitz, his own charge of the Light Brigade. Very original, I know. In his case, we can say more madness than genius. The Russian column penetrated 4 kilometers beyond the contact line.
Into the breach!
That's when Azov immediately responded by unleashing one of their tanks, which released one of the thickest loads at point blank. At the same time, the 12th Brigade Azov reported the capture of 23 Russian soldiers. It's possible that this entire attack force was annihilated.
A great success!
On a side note, most of the battalions of the 12th Brigade Azov are labeled as Special Forces. So in theory, this means they're specialized in infiltration missions, as well as hit-and-run attacks. Essentially, they strike hard and then pull back quickly before the Russians unleash their artillery. On the 14th of January, Russian assault detachments advanced 1,000 meters on both sides of the Historichna street. Forward elements were now less than 400 meters from reaching the northern edge of Toretsk. This also means they were about to cut off the supply lines of this Ukrainian grouping hiding in the industrial area. The Russian gamble was about to pay off. By the 19th of January, most of Toretsk was now in the gray zone. And that's another thing you have to understand. The Russians advanced very slowly between September and December, and then everything collapsed very quickly for the Ukrainians in January. In response, the Ukrainians launched a quick counterattack against the northern outskirts in a district called Krymske. Once again, due to the lack of available infantry reserves, the Ukrainian command dispatched a tank to knock out the attackers from their positions. Over the course of the next 10 days, Russian riflemen continued to infiltrate enemy lines, and that's how they reached the northern edge of Toretsk. Throughout January, the Russians progressed rapidly. But like we said, the city is vast.
It's a trap!
Russian infantry squads probably could not effectively clear out every building from top to bottom, potentially leaving a number of enemy pockets behind. Maybe the Russian Ministry of Defense put a lot of pressure on the 51st Combined Arms Army to capture the city ASAP. So instead of the methodical approach of the previous months, they cut corners and just called it a win. Further south, the Russians secured another 300 meters in Nelipivka, as fighting slowly approached Cherbenivka. If this village fell, it would seal the fate of the last Ukrainian defenders holding out in the Zabalka southern district. In response to all these Russian gains, the Fire Support Regiment Dnipro 1 of the Lyud Police Brigade heavily shelled the northern districts. A bombardment combined with a counterattack supported by at least one tank. So the situation in Toretsk in January was very volatile. The Russians did make a lot of gains, but at the same time Ukrainian resistance also stiffened. February 2025. Overall, it took 5 months of difficult street-to-street fighting for the Russian army to reach the northern edge of Toretsk. That's when the Russian Ministry of Defense announced the complete capture of Toretsk on the 7th of February. Turns out that the commanders of the Russian 51st Combined Arms Army sent false reports up the hierarchy, claiming that they had finished mopping up the entire urban area from enemy forces, which they didn't. The Russians had just captured key points of the city and called it a day. Now if we look at the map by pro-Ukrainian Deep State UA, there's no territorial changes between the 1st and the 15th of February. February 20th, standstill, the same thing. In reality, the Russian division tasked to capture the city of Toretsk got bogged down. At the same time, these two Russian soldiers claimed that the 150th Division they are attached to needed urgent reinforcements. The lead unit operating in Toretsk at that time was the 103rd Motorized Rifle Regiment, and according to them it suffered very high casualties. Because of that, they had to be removed from the line of contact. They also stated that the majority of these guys came from Central Asia, Uzbeks, Tajiks, Kyrgyz. So command and control was difficult since they didn't understand basic Russian orders. That's exactly when Ukraine prepared a major counteroffensive in Toretsk.
Surprise, motherfucker!
The special forces of the police spearheaded the assault. Night and day, entire squads of operatives poured into Toretsk to find buildings free of enemy troops and establish FOBs, thus mapping out enemy positions and paving the way for the second wave. In this post from the 22nd of February, we can read, "The fighters of the 4th, 18th, and 12th Brigades of the National Guard of Ukraine continue to effectively carry out combat missions." Now I want you to pay attention to this man. This is 33-year-old Denis Prokopenko. He was one of the Azov commanders that returned from Russian captivity after the siege of Mariupol. Eventually he went back to duty and is now the commander of the reformed 12th Brigade Azov of the National Guard. Let's say that he's in serious need of revenge. All of a sudden, on the 23rd of February, a Ukrainian vehicle was hit right at the heart of Toretsk. Unlike what many people said, I don't think it was part of a dedicated counterattack. Most likely a simple rotation. But then again, the big question for the Russian command was,
what are you doing here?
Toretsk was supposed to have been cleared of enemy forces. Now this video could indicate that dozens of Ukrainian fire teams were still hiding in the industrial area. The second question was, how did they even get there? The most likely scenario is that the vehicle pushed across the Khimkolonk district from the west. In this case, Russian forces had a very porous and superficial control of the sector. Over the following days, the Ukrainians used the same infiltration tactics as the Russians. Small groups were dispatched left and right across the city. In this video from the 24th, we can see a Ukrainian vehicle disembarking an entire fire team right in front of a building held by the enemy. On the map, this meant the Ukraine command started clearing out this entire sector. The next day, on the 25th, another two interesting videos were released. In the first one, a Ukrainian drone is recording a friendly armored vehicle as it gets hit by a Russian FPV. But then the vehicle is not destroyed and quickly drives off. In the second footage, we see soldiers of the Ukrainian 4th Battalion of the elite 101st Guard Brigade of the General Staff throwing one grenade after another at a Russian rifle squad below. End result for the enemy, 6 KIA and 1 captured. This firefight supposedly took place near Krimske, whereas the drone attack on the vehicle happened right here next to the waste heap. This most likely meant the Ukrainian command was using the Toretskaya mine as its forward operating base in Toretsk. 24 hours later, Russian drone operators of the Bars 14 Battalion of Volunteers struck this tower, celebrating the defeat of Ukrainian troops. Thing is, this tower is geolocated right here. This could potentially indicate that all the Russian positions in this northern part of town had been eliminated and cleared out. Meanwhile, on the 26th of February, we have a video where a Russian soldier literally throws an anti-tank mine into the building to clear it out from its occupants. Not SpaceX level of technology, but it works. This incident happened right here in the Southern District, where a lot of small firefights suddenly erupted. It seems the Ukrainians were rolling back all the Russian gains from the previous month by positioning the rifle squads at key locations across the city to destabilize the Russian defense. This is what pro-Russian mapper Rybar believed. They wrote, "More and more footage is emerging from Toretsk, showing members of Ukrainian formations in various parts of the city. All this, for obvious reasons, raises questions about the statements about the complete liberation of the city voiced by the Russian Ministry of Defense on the 7th of February 2025. Indeed, from the Russian perspective, there was reason to be concerned. The same day as Rybar's post on the 28th of February, a reconnaissance platoon of the 1st Azov Battalion conducted a raid into the Southern District, where they captured one Russian soldier. More and more Ukrainian fire teams were deployed into the urban area. In this footage recorded by a Ukrainian soldier, we can see that along the road leading to Toretsk, there are a lot of burnt down pickup trucks, a BRDM-2 combat vehicle, and a Marda 183. This was the cost for Ukraine to maintain its positions in the city. By the end of February, we witnessed a succession of Ukrainian raids deep into the urban area of Toretsk from multiple directions. But overall, the fog of war remained. Were these Ukrainian attacks just quick jabs, perhaps to rescue stranded friendly units? Or were they actually part of a coordinated counteroffensive? March 2025. On the 2nd of March, the Russians released this video where we could see a Ukrainian soldier running from one building to another. Then there's a nasty cut and the Russians only show a building being demolished by artillery fire. Number one, we don't know if it's even the same building where a soldier ran into. Probably not. And number two, this is where the Ukrainian soldier was geolocated, right here on the map, meaning forward elements of the Ukrainian army were now roaming in this entire sector. It was also interesting to see that some of these assault units were composed of Brazilian volunteers. This probably meant that the 49th Assault Battalion Karpatska Sich was also involved in this operation. These Ukrainian infiltration missions increased throughout the month of March. In this footage, two Azov fighters zeroed in on a Russian soldier that got entangled in barbed wire. GG, well played. War is not glamorous. During this firefight, one of the soldiers of the 12th Brigade Azov was severely wounded. He would not survive the time a medevac team showed up. So the medics of the Azov Brigade dropped pouches of blood from a drone for the transfusion in order to buy time for him. And because of the creativity of these medics, the soldier survived. Overall, more and more Ukrainian forces flooded the northern part of the city, as shown in Russian FPV footage. It seemed as if the Ukrainian battle plan was the following: pin down Russian forces at the edge of the city, while carrying out a flanking attack from the north from the FOB mine, as well as from the west from the stronghold of Sherbinivka. The objective: link up with the Ukrainian troops holding the central mine. These Ukrainian infiltrations were supported by drone drops by the 21st Separate Special Purpose Battalion of the Presidential Brigade. So in this area of Toretsk, the Ukrainian command concentrated some of its most elite formations. By the 3rd of March, Ukrainian forces continued their infiltrations, as well as their drone strikes across Toretsk, hunting down enemy armored vehicles one by one. During one of these raids, they captured a Russian soldier of the Berkut 132nd Motorized Brigade of the DPR. Turns out the man was born in Ukraine and is a native of Luhansk Oblast. By the 5th of March, as the city was covered in snow, Ukrainian assault detachments continued to flank the Russian 103rd Motor Rifle Regiment in the southern district by disembarking fire teams into the woods in the proximity of the urban area. Some of these rotations were intercepted by Russian artillery strikes. In this footage, we see 4 Ukrainian armored vehicles that were hit, 2 M113 APCs and 2 Cossack MRAPs. We only see the ones that were intercepted, but how many squads were successfully transferred into the city unnoticed? According to the reports of pro-Russian mapper Rybar, by the 6th of March, the entire northwestern sector of Toretsk now laid in the gray zone, as assault squads of the 12th Brigade Azov mopped up contested areas in the southern districts. 24 hours later, on the 7th of March, some drama was made public. Turns out it was DPR commanders that announced Toretsk as fully liberated, and they're the ones that sent false reports up the hierarchy. The Russian Ministry of Defense took their words for it, and yeah. The DPR commanders left multiple pockets of resistance scattered across the city, and they certainly did not inform their superiors of this reality. On this map, you can see all the geolocations of Ukrainian forces in Toretsk between the 20th of February and March 6. And it was too late to backpedal because the Russian Ministry of Defense had already announced Toretsk as theirs. Because of this mess, the Russian command is now planning to transfer the entire 2nd Motor Rifle Division to Toretsk. On the 8th of March, Ukrainian positions were shelled in this sector, and the Russians launched drone drops in this area in the southern sector, possibly indicating additional Ukrainian gains. Meanwhile, a Ukrainian MRAP was immobilized by a fiber optics drone in this sector. 24 hours later, intense clashes were recorded in the Zabalka district. At the same time, Russian artillery is attempting to halt the flow of Ukrainian reinforcements into the city. We can also mention how on the 10th of March, a Ukrainian soldier of the 101st Brigade of the General Staff recorded a video in this area, which is supposed to be deep inside enemy lines. Overall, we can say that the key to Ukraine's counteroffensive in Toretsk will be the capture of these high-rise buildings. According to Zodiac maps, at this point, the actual front line in Toretsk looked like that. The Ukrainians controlled the sectors near Krimske, the area near waste heap number 12, the repair facility in the northwest, parts of the Khimkoronk district, plus a third of the southern Zabalka district. If all this is factual, then the Ukrainian battle plan gets much clearer. I think the mission is to capture this important road junction at the center of Toretsk. That could explain why they push from these 3 directions. And at this rate, they might very well reach their objective. The benefit from this strategy is that it chops up the Russian defense into islands. They can hardly support each other. Additionally, for these islands, logistics will become extremely difficult. At this rate, the Ukrainians could regain 60% of the urban area of Toretsk. Now, I don't have a crystal ball knowing what's gonna happen. All I can say is that if the Ukrainians put in the manpower and they're serious about this counteroffensive, they could very well chase out the Russians from Toretsk, and thus roll back 7 months of Russian gains. At the same time, the Russians are not ready to get kicked out of Toretsk that easily. Allegedly, they're sending a lot of reinforcements that will be able to retreat some of Ukraine's best units. In the end, we have to admit that Ukraine's attempt at recapturing Toretsk is a much better objective than its offensive in Kursk Oblast. Put simply, it's a limited objective that can be reached by the AFU and that has a direct impact on the battlefield in Donbass. That's all I have for you today. Let me know in the comment section what you thought of my analysis. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to support my work, make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal. The links are in the description below.